Okay, so now we welcome our second presenter. That's Martina Hynan from the University of Galway. And the title of her paper is Exploring Natality as the More Than Human Capacity to Begin Anew. So Martina, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to start by thanking Anna and for this amazing initiative in getting the society up and running. And I share Stella's desire to applaud you, Anna. It's and everybody involved. And I'm just absolutely delighted to be part of this opening panel. I'm just going to launch right in. So I'm based in the west of Ireland, and for almost 30 years now, my art practice has focused primarily on childbirth. So this has included participatory art projects featuring women's birth stories, and being a coordinator, artist, curator, and birth activist with the successful legislative campaign that secured mandatory inquests for maternal deaths in Ireland. And this was led by the grassroots group, the Elephant Collective. But today I want to actually focus on my more recent work, which is my PhD, and some thoughts about a new project that I'm trying to launch, and would love your thoughts on that too. But also just to point out, in the interest of transparency, I'm no longer at the University of Galway, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody there, particularly everybody at the Centre for Irish Studies at the University of Galway, and my doctoral supervisor, Dr. Nessa Cronin, for their amazing support throughout my PhD journey, which ended last year. So moving on. So basically, thinking with the theme of this symposium in relation to my PhD research, so I've come to understand natality as an ecological process and event. And by that, I mean that natality is an entangled, ongoing exchange between the human and the non-human. And so for me, this way of thinking about what it is to be born is situated within a more than human world, more than human understanding of the world. So this lens has expanded my concept, or my understanding of the concept of natality, beyond the inherited interpretations of the birthing body as a bounded singular entity. So in today's presentation, I just want to unpack how I've arrived at this understanding of natality, and why I think it's important for thinking about the future of birth care, both human and non-human. So now, whoa, look, it worked. So the title of my PhD, which is an interdisciplinary with art practice PhD, is On the Wisp, Rethinking Birthplace in Ireland for a More Than Human World. So I came across the phrase on the wisp or on the straw early in my research, and I found it very captivating. On the wisp was a euphemistic description of a woman birthing onto straw. It was quite a common phrase in Ireland. So for me, it's a reminder that prior to the medicalization of birth and the event of birth, occurred within home places and was part of a kinship system, a kinship way of living here in Ireland. So it's this materiality of this emplaced way of living, which is of critical interest to me. So just to say, the images are from work I created during my PhD. So this is of an image of a dress that I made from muslin, and I embedded it with handmade straw paper. And it's a gesture towards the reciprocal exchange between the pregnant body and the physical environment. Excuse me. So one key question I had at the beginning of my research was, what is birthplace? Indeed, what is place? Initially, I thought of place as a geolocation, which it is. However, I found that further investigations led me to the work of feminist environmental thinkers, and this included feminist theorist and physicist Karen Barad. So my understanding of place builds on Barad's theory of space-time mattering, which asserts, and I quote, "Space, time, and matter are interactively produced in the ongoing differential articulation of the world," end quote. So Barad's term interactive proposes that the human is in ongoing exchange with its environment and vice versa. So this reciprocal understanding of place, and consequently birthplace, is part of the ongoing process between space, time, and matter. So this way of considering birthplace allowed me to rethink the historical legacy of the institutionalization of childbirth practices here in Ireland. So the evolution of obstetrics through scientific knowledge production, which has underpinned the systematization of the birthing body, is premised, I propose, on a form of highly gendered human exceptionalism. Anthropologist Anna Singh argues that, and I quote, species interdependence is a well-known fact, except when it comes to humans. Human exceptionalism blinds us. End quote. So this blindness, the human exceptionalism inculcates within the maternity care system in Ireland and elsewhere is, I believe, based on the lack of recognition that the human is in constant exchange with the physical environment. So I identify birthplace as the ongoing reciprocal exchange between the human body and the material physical environment. So therefore, birthplace is an ecological process, an event, and I propose that birthplace be reframed within a more than human world. Such an environmental perspective acknowledges the complex interdependency of the human with the non-human. So at the beginning of the 20th century, most Irish people's birthplace was synonymous with their home place. However, by the end of the century, 99% of all Irish births occurred in hospital settings. So for example, in 1973, there were 108 maternity units in Ireland. Today, there are 19. In County Clare, where I live, there have been no maternity services since 1987. And so for this region, pregnant people must travel up to 2 hours each way for their clinic appointments while pregnant, and crucially when they're in labour. And this is repeated around the country. So for me, the current institutionally based maternity system, sorry, I've just lost my place for a moment there. For me, our current institutions are really forms of non-places. The core pillars of sorry, I'm losing my place here a bit, sorry. Okay, so the current institutionally based maternity system is premised on this form of human exceptionalism, and that is based on the obstetric gaze, time and space, which perpetuates a centralized mechanistic approach to childbirth. So the core pillars of the institutionalization of childbirth rely on obstetric time, such as the active management of labor and due dates, obstetric space, and that's the maternity units embedded in the hospital setting, and crucially, they rely on the obstetric gaze, that sees the birthing body as the isolated entity in need of management and control. Phrases such as the mechanics of labor point to a way of thinking about women's bodies as a kind of machine. So births, I argue, occur in non-places. So non-place is a term created by anthropologist Marc Auger to describe transitional and liminal spaces. So these are temporary spaces that deny a connection between the human and the non-human. For example, airports or shopping malls, and I would argue in the Irish context, maternity units. So for me, this rapid disregard of birthplace is indicative of broader issues related to how human-centric thinking dominates all aspects of living. So the photographs here are of birthplace plaques, which I made from straw pulp and embedded them with wildflower seeds. I then took these to derelict houses around County Clare, where births are very likely to have taken place up to the 1960s and in Ireland. So they're acknowledging that reciprocal exchange between the place and the body, that the place births the people and vice versa. The people birth into place. But one person who tried to offer an alternative to the current obstetric-led institutionally based maternity care in Ireland was independent midwife Philomena Canning. So the details of how she was prevented from setting up her independent birthing centre are far too complicated to go into here because of the time constraint. But if anybody wants any information, please get in touch with me, and I'd be more than happy to share her story with you in more detail. I will give a little bit of information. So Philomena very sadly died from ovarian cancer in 2019. And at her funeral, I was struck by several references to the importance that her time working as a midwife in Australia had on her. So she worked as a midwife with Indigenous communities near Alice Springs in the 1980s, and she credited this experience with revitalizing her love of and commitment to midwifery. She returned to Ireland in the late 1980s and worked as an independent midwife. In 2011, Philomena made public her plans to open an independent birthing centre in Dublin, which she planned to call Alukuro House, and that fascinated me. So reporting on Philomena's plans, journalist Ethna Donnellan notes, and I'll quote Ethna, As she says, Philomena wanted to call her project Alakura House, meaning place of birth, as a result of her experiences as a midwife with Aboriginal women in Central Australia. A birth centre is a midwife, and she describes what a birth centre is. We only have 2 in Ireland. And we've a population of over 5 million. Whereas in Northern Ireland, with a population of 1.5 million, there are, I think it's 8 maternity-led units. So it's very obstetrically led system here. But in 2016, this is a quote from an interview that Philomena gave about her understanding of the grandmother's law, which she learned about while working in Australia. And I've highlighted the end of that statement when she says that the women believe that the disruption of their system of childbirth was the cause of the breakdown in their culture. So this rupture of birth from place is what I'm striving to address in my work. So I'm currently in the early stages of developing plans for what I am calling a sympoetic natal garden. So what do I mean by sympoetic and a natal garden? First of all, what is sympoesis? So in the words of Donna Haraway, and I quote, "Sympoesis is a simple word. It means making with. Nothing makes itself. Nothing is really autopoetic or self-organizing. Sympoesis is a word proper to complex, dynamic, responsive, situated historical systems. It's a word for worlding with, in company. Sympoesis enfolds autopoiesis and generatively unfurls and extends it." So engaging with the concept of sympoesis helps to challenge human exceptionalism, which undergirds the hegemonic power structures such as the human-centric basis of the Western medical model of maternity care. And as I say, this takes the form of a very institutionally based and obstetric-led maternity system in Ireland. So during my PhD, I made what I called a series of bowls. You can see a straw little bowl there, and I called them holobiont bowls. And again, it's all this kind of metaphor for the co-creative reciprocal interconnectedness of people with place. Evolutionary development biologist Scott Gilbert states that, and I quote, "Birth is the continuation of the holobiont community." A holobiont is an assemblage of a host with multiple symbiotic relationships, and this is a recognition and acknowledgement of, yet again, another level of a reciprocal way of living. So using straw is a reference to the phrase on the wisp, and Philomena's description of the grandmother's law is a reminder of birthing otherwise. More than this, they're reminders that birth is an ecological process and event, which I think we have forgotten, or we are helped to forget in the Irish context anyway. So this way of thinking about being born has helped to broaden my understanding of natality and the potential future of birth care in a more than human world. So dedicating a sympoetic natal garden to Philomena is one way to keep her story alive, and I believe we do need to tell Philomena's story in many ways and multiple contexts as a reminder of the hegemonic power system and structures that inform the maternity system, and also as potential ways to disrupt and offer other ways of thinking about birthplace. So in 2014, Philomena, she was finally ready to submit her plans for Alakura House to the Health Service Executive for their approval. So the HSE, it runs the Public Health Service in Ireland. However, shortly after submitting these plans, her indemnity licence was withdrawn by the HSE without notification. So without any indemnity insurance, which is tied, which it's complicated, but basically they withdrew her indemnity insurance. She could no longer practice as a midwife. And as Philomena said, that day, September 12th, 2014, signaled the end of my professional life, my livelihood, and my reputation in one fell swoop. And at the time, sociologist Joe Murphy-Lawless wrote about Philomena's case and said, as I said, quote, "This was no mistake as we first thought, but turned out to be a sophisticated and ruthless hunting down of a midwife with an impeccable record of care by a group of midwife administrators in the state's HSE, the operational arm of the Public Health Services. It was initiated, we have always believed, in fear and panic on their part, that Philomena's long hoped for plans for independent midwife birthing centre, with fully independent insurance were nearing fruition. So systemic resistance to births outside of hospitals in Ireland is well documented. And while many people and organisations work to improve birth choices for pregnant people living here, I believe that until we begin to rethink the parameters of what it is to be born, we will not be able to address the persistence of the bounded body ideology that dominates the maternity system. And as I mentioned earlier, obstetric space, time, and matter determines these parameters. And that underlying ideology of human exceptionalism needs to be challenged. So the image of the budding borage seeds here are planted in one of my little holobiont bowls, and this is an experiment. So while borage is considered to be a galactagogue and therefore helps support breast milk production, to focus only on this aspect of borage reinforces a human-centric way of view of the plant. So this emphasis could undermine the co-creative ambition of my sympoetic natal garden. And so what I'm trying to think about is I then subsequently took that bowl and I planted it in our garden. And the reason I did so was to allow the taproots the opportunity to grow and develop. So the borage taproots, they actually increase aeration and they improve soil structure, increasing water percolation and oxygen. So it's understanding the complexity of this human and non-human interconnectedness and this co-creative way of thinking is what I'm trying to develop more and more. So symbolically, the phrase on the wisp or on the straw represents the fundamental presence of nature in childbirth, but furthermore, the properties of straw indicate that it may have reciprocal healing properties to both human and non-human. So the burial of straw, for example, improves soil quality and, according to health scientists, it improves soil fertility. And it also has health benefits for humans, including anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antioxidant. So at the moment, in Ireland, for example, there's also an initiative, the Straw Incorporation Measure, and they're paying tillage farmers to bury straw to improve soil structure. It's quite interesting. So to create a sympoetic natal garden, for me, offers a method of rethinking our relationship with what it means to be born, birthing soil, birthing people, birthing place. It seeks to question the inherited ideological framework for the medicalization of childbirth. And it's my hope that it offers an expanded understanding of natality that addresses the historical shift from home to hospital, which currently disregards society's relationship with birthplace. So creating a sympoetic garden would provide a way of rethinking and retelling natal stories. So I'm very much in agreement with Donna Haraway when she asserts that the story must change. As she says, we must think, and that means simply we must change the story must change. And as she states elsewhere, stories are much bigger than ideologies, and in that is our hope. So for Haraway, new forms of storytelling offers ways of critically engaging with such legacies. And I'm offering my sympoetic natal garden as a form of storytelling. The decoupling of birth from the ongoing interconnection with everyday place is recent. Thinking with pre-medicalized birthing traditions in Ireland and elsewhere, such as the grandmother's law, we are reminded of ways of living entwined with place and of the interdependence of people with place. Anthropologist and environmental humanities scholar Deborah Bird Rose describes the emplaced ecological self as, quote, permeable. Place penetrates the body and the body slips into place, end quote. So on the wisp or on the straw is a phrase which thus comes from an emplaced way of living that existed prior to the medicalization of birth. And I believe that Philomena understood the significance of birthplace, and so that's why I want to dedicate the garden to her memory. And I believe that this expanded understanding of natality as the entanglement of the human with the non-human situates future birth care within a more than human world that offers an alternative way of thinking, a way of thinking otherwise about what it is to be born. So my work sort of sits at the intersection of environmental humanities, medical humanities, and visual culture. And so my PhD was trying to develop this sympoetic storytelling. So I use video, photography, material practice, sculptural forms made with plant matter, etc. And I'd like to include this multimedia approach within the development of this project that I'm just literally in the early stages of. So I'm really happy for suggestions, comments, and collaborations. And thank you so much for your patience with my technical issues and for listening. Thank you.